Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to, depending on however you may look at your clock or wherever you may live, this early morning, middle of the night bonus upload. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost you a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. Folks, they definitely do matter, and I appreciate it. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into this early morning or middle of the night bonus upload, shall we? Today's first encounter. I'm going to recount an experience of mine that I rarely tell. My own family doesn't even know about this, and while it may sound weird to you, trust me, it makes more sense to tell internet strangers than people I'm forced to be around. So, without further explanation, let me get into my experience. This happened when I was much younger. I have to ask my parents when the camping trip happened to tell you how many years ago it was, but I can assure you it was at least a decade. Now, I'm going to use some questionable words for describing the location. Words like wooded and wilderness reserve, because I don't know the best words for this thing. Around a decade ago, a friend from church asked me to join his family on a camping trip to a wilderness reserve called Oasis State Park. Of course, since this is my best friend and his family had always been nice, I said yeah. Up until that point, I had only camped so rarely. So the prospect of camping with a friend and his family seemed absolutely amazing. So we began preparing for the weekend while I wasn't busy. I got my own tent, my own sleeping bag, my supplies. Once all of that was gathered, the father of the friend came and picked me up, and my parents waved me off. There are quite a few things I remember about this trip. The amazing, hostile yet beautiful New Mexico countryside, the plateaus, the campsite. The New Mexican wilderness isn't something a lot of people fantasize about camping in. At least, not so far as I know, but Oasis State Park is different. The camping plots are all nice, even if the best are always taken. There's a pretty lake, lots of wildlife, and I hate to admit, more trees than I've ever seen in town. Yeah, I know nobody thinks of multitude of trees when they think of New Mexico, and for a good reason. They aren't the most common occurrence in the plains unless planted by people. Regardless, Oasis has enough for me to use the term woods for the sake of brevity. So, anyway, we found ourselves a plot and began setting our tents. By afternoon, the tents were set, and me and my friend ditched his oh-so-boring younger sister in favor of exploring. The park, the memories were fantastic. We found a snake by the lake and watched it drink from the water before slithering off quickly. We explored a place I remember was pretty sandy. We watched a roadrunner do its thing. We played all day after lunch and saw so many amazing things that by the end of the day I would have never thought anything could have gone wrong. We finished the day like you always do by collecting sticks and starting a fire to eat s'mores and tell ghost stories. None of the stories were scary, probably because me and my friend were kids and his sister was even younger. And his father was lead singer at our church, and making children cry was bad for his reputation. So, by ghost stories, I mean little jokes of stories designed to make us giggle more than cry. Yeah, it was lame, but what do you expect? Anyway, shortly after the stories were told and the s'mores were eaten, we retired, me to my tent and my friend and his father and his sister to theirs. Now for this setup, I'll explain positioning. This was all going to be important. My tent was at one edge of the plot, and my friend's tent was at the exact opposite. This was for privacy matters. Now, at the end of this plot was a mini trail that led through thick brush to the lake. Also, about 3 feet from our tent was a little tree. I don't know what kind of tree it was, but it was still young and small. The trail to the lake was to the left of my tent entrance. The lake was behind it, and a thin tree line set across the trail in front of my tent. That trail in front of my tent led to the bathrooms. So I went to bed without a single bit of fear, and before I did, I went ahead and urinated on the tree outside of my tent because of laziness. Screw the 2-minute walk to the bathrooms when the nature's toilet was right outside of my tent. So I finished closing up my tent for the night and climbed into my sleeping bag to go to bed. I don't know how long I had slept for, but I woke up to use the restroom. And it wasn't the kind of potty you need a tree, or at least not reasonably. So, not being a moron who'd wander around in the dark, I grabbed my little lantern, flipped on my LED lantern, and unzipped the inner flap to the tent before the outer, as if the little nylon net could protect me from what I was about to see. Now, I should mention that outside of cities in New Mexico, it's quite common to hear coyotes howl. It's a nightly occurrence when camping. Heck, even up in a little village like Logan, you can hear howls from your bedroom. It isn't so unnerving when you're in the house, but when you've got some flimsy nylon walls to protect you, and that's it, well, it isn't the most comforting sound. As I unzipped my tent flap, I heard a few howls, but they were distant and not worrying. What stunned me into stillness was the very loud howl from the direction of the lake, about a yard from my tent at most. This howl was different, though. It had the feel of a coyote howl, but it was deeper and lasted much longer. I simply sat there petrified at what I had heard. I wouldn't be able to guess at how long I sat there breathing hard with my fingers still grasping that zipper, but however long it may have been was just long enough for this thing that made that howl to come up that trail next to my tent. Suddenly I heard the crunching of claws in the dirt, and after that claws on the rocks that made our camping plots. Then I saw the largest shadow made by a living creature that little kid me had ever seen. It lumbered heavily into the direction of the sparse tree line where I assumed the other howl had come from, but before it passed the tree I had urinated on, it stopped. I realized only then that I was both lit like a candle and had not been trying to silence my heavy breathing. By then it was too late, as this hulking thing lumbered over closer to the tree and into the light of my lantern. As dim as this little LED light was at that distance, it was just barely enough to make out details. I'd like to note a few very important details that stuck out to me as odd. It had roughly the fur coloring of a coyote and that classic Dogman head shape, with the tiny pointed ears. It was too small to make sense. It also made strange noises as it lowered to all fours in front of my tent. Popping sounds like joints rubbing together, as I can only assume its knees busted out of their standing joints and fell into different joints to support all fours. It briefly ignored the very obvious frightened kid in the tent as it sniffed the tree I had urinated on. The breaths were similar to a dog's, but much longer and far deeper, almost like a horse's. Then that thing turned to me and stared straight into my eyes. Its eyes didn't glow. They didn't peer into my soul, but they were unbelievably unnatural. Above all things, I saw in those eyes a predator. Have you ever been in the position where you made eye contact with a beast you know is stronger than you? Something you know could just slaughter you. And you know it knows you know. Just looking for seemingly so damn long that I thought for sure I'd just be a bloody stain by the time anyone reached my tent. Screaming would do nothing. I doubt a gun would even hurt this thing. But despite every feeling in my gut, despite dread of knowing that it was a predator and I was prey, I didn't die. Instead, it turned slowly, ever so slowly, and just sprinted off into the woods. Just gone into the night faster than it had come. I have one personal friend who knows and jokes that it was my urine on the tree, like I marked my territory or something dumb like that, or maybe it wasn't hungry, or most improbable, it had just enough morals not to kill a kid. I'll never really know. Needless to say, I didn't go to the bathroom. I just put my lantern away, closed my tent flap, and held it all night. I don't remember sleeping that night. I might have. I might not have. But if I did, it was dreamless. I do remember that I tried to hide this experience the next day, asking if my friend and his family heard any howling. Well, they did hear the howling. They told me they just ignored it, thinking it was a coyote doing coyote stuff. I was encouraged to just ignore it as if I was a city kid who had never heard a coyote howling before. The next day I stayed as close to my friend as possible while exploring, and had nearly forgotten the encounter by lunch. Somehow the safety I had been feeling during the day put the beast out of my mind. Until we found tracks in that super sandy spot, coyote tracks. I think seeing those tracks confirmed to me that it wasn't just a dream. Because of that, I showed enough fear that night to convince my friend's family to let me sleep in their tent. Even in the comfort of the warmer tent, more people means warmth, and in the presence of an adult dad and two other people, I couldn't sleep that night. I'd nearly drift off to sleep, and then I'd hear a coyote howl. The next day I pretended to be sick and got my mother to drive up and take me home a day or two early. Worst camping trip of my life. It ruined not only my whole summer, but it also ruined camping. I haven't been camping without a tent buddy since, and I don't plan to. Even then, I'm never comfortable, always listening to strange noises and acting paranoid. This really messed me up, I guess, being forced to see that a human top of the food chain is utterly powerless in front of a beast like that. Seriously, I don't think I can press hard enough to make anyone realize how powerless I felt. Even today, when I think about this, I remember two things. Those eyes and that feeling. Just writing this sent multiple shivers down my spine. That said, you might be asking why I'm talking about this again, if it terrifies me so much. Simply, I want answers. Today's second encounter. I was living in an isolated coal patch, too small to be a town or a village, that considered one circle of houses. I believe there were about 10 houses, but only 6 or 7 were occupied while I was there. This was deep in Pennsylvania's rolling woods, about an hour and a half outside of Pittsburgh proper. I commuted into the city for school and work for financial reasons, and just because I wanted the countryside, you know. The only store was a General Dollar. The post office could never deliver my mail because, well, they couldn't find me. And they just got Wi-Fi 2 months after I moved into the house turned duplex I was residing in. All the houses were built for coal miners. There's an alley that runs through the back that makes up the back of the circle, and this is where lost people turn around and the outhouses used to be. All the houses' fronts face the surrounding countryside in the woods. My place, it faces the holler, which I didn't mind until it was dark, and then I minded quite a lot. We had a gravel lot in front of the holler to park in. I had a park facing the holler, staring right into the tree line, which started a foot from my car. I always got the sense of being watched in the evenings, and honestly thought if I saw anything, it would be there. But spoiler alert, I didn't. I'm going to include the holler structure because it leads to why I feel this was Dogman more than a Bigfoot. So the top half, where my car is, slowly pitches down into the shallow basin. Off to the right of my car, there is a sloped entry out into the basin that you can walk right into the holler proper, like it's been carved out. Same further down the road. There's half a stone wall still standing from an outhouse, but only one wall. Some wrought iron remains from the other side, but the rest was crumbled, but nothing. On the furthest side is a staircase that goes nowhere. They just never tore it down, and then the wilderness continues for another half a mile, flanked on one side by cornfield and wilds, until it hit the other side of the slope as a steep incline. Dubious ATV trail. There's an ATV trail that runs from the entrance for a mile and a half down along the banks of the creek. It got about 5 feet deep at points and ran through the whole holler, from the street turning into the circle all the way to the fields of corn where the trail ends. The trail and the holler are surrounded by countryside, and by that I mean you can drive and not see anyone but cows for a while. There's plenty of livestock farms, and the cornfields are tall and abundant. Even when it's just an open field, the rolling hills are so vast it's hard to tell what's there and what's not. Cows, sheep, chicken, plentiful, cornfields, water source that won't freeze, mines. The mines, this area was full of abandoned mines. While I was living there, I acknowledged that yes, something big was possibly living in the mines. Cryptids were vaguely on my radar, but they were mostly just like any other woodland animal to me. You go into an environment that isn't yours, you're taking the risk on yourself, even if it's just for a morning stroll with coffee. But there wasn't much I could do about it, and because of grad school, I was too exhausted to do anything about it. There were nights I would be on my porch and I would hear a man's voice yelling for help, calling out to me, and I would go back inside and lock up for the night, like I've seen that movie. In the evenings, mine gas could be seen rising out of the holler. Every night, orbs would appear in the trees in front of my house. It became like a light show. Me, a cup of coffee, my homework, fireflies, mine gas. All in all, it was very plentiful in things to get distracted by. I knew what Bigfoot smelled like and what it felt like when they were around, having grown up in Ohio and spent my childhood visiting Salt Fork and spending time outside even in my own town. Our family ended up having rules for forest safety, and number one was if the forest comes, it's time for you to leave. My parents never said what they meant by the forest, and they never said Bigfoot or anything about that, but we did learn the smell and not to leave gifts. Kinda glad we had those rules now. Coyotes, check. I noticed that there were a lot of animal skulls scattered along the shore. I attributed these to the coyotes, who were an active community member. I spent nights listening to them and heard a pack take down a deer in the holler one night, so close I could hear that deer grunting. I became familiar with them, but only saw one once. He was beefy and the size of a German shepherd. If my neighbors left a deer carcass on the trail, it took was one night for them to pick it clean, and this happened quite often, both during hunting season and off-season. Food supplied by humans, check. So this next piece actually made my blood stop for a moment, because I remember thinking it was because my landlord was horrible. But when I moved in, there were long slash marks all along the side of my house. A few more did appear during my time there, but I was like, haha, oh that wind, because I had never lived in a house before OFC, and all my brain was on grad school. The most prevalent one I remember was by the floodlight at the back door, which I had on religiously. Slashes inciting, check. So there are multiple times where I would go on a morning coffee stroll down the ATV trail and suddenly feel like I was being watched, followed, stalked, like too many I can count. I was too tired and stressed about grad school to react in any appropriate way, honestly. I was in a rough shape. For most of them, I thought it was the stress, but as things started getting stronger, I would sigh dramatically and say, "Fine, I'm going home," out loud, turn on my heels and walk back home. But that's not what I want to talk about, no. It's the smelly raccoon. Twice, on 2 different nights, then my neighbor shot something in my yard. This was peak grad school crunch time. I vividly remember it being 1 or 1:30 a.m. because I was just letting myself do some writing on the bed. My bed was on the second floor, and I had one window in the front of the bed and another about 3 feet beside that one. I'm finally starting to relax when it hits me like a brick wall. It's this very pungent odor of musk or decay, rotting flesh, urine, horrible. It was almost like Bigfoot smell I had encountered before, but this one was more decaying, if that makes sense. Like you could smell the iron smell of blood, whereas I hadn't smelled that before as a kid. I swear my eyes were watering and I thought I had left the window open. I rushed over to close it, but it was closed. I closed the blinds, but not before. I did take a quick peek outside, turning out the lights. Nothing. The smell stayed. It didn't follow me room to room. It stayed in that area. Whatever was issuing that smell was either on the roof or right below on the covered porch. Either way, I was ducked. If this was a person who wanted in, they could easily break in through the potato quality storm door. That didn't have a lock and held only a bar of wood as a gate. They'd be in my house in seconds. I made sure my room blinds were closed and sat away from the window. The smell lingered for hours, but finally began to dissipate. I went to bed before it left, by the way. I was too tired to wait it out. The next morning, I noticed nothing different. Nothing was knocked over. No one had left a shoe print, tire tracks, or cigarettes. I continued going with my stinky raccoon theory. It was the only way I would be able to get through this because the next night Stinky was back. Again, I made sure all the curtains were closed, and I didn't even go downstairs for the bathroom. I just accepted my fate was to die on the second floor that night because I was paranoid about Stinky Raccoon. So stinky, it made my eyes water. So stinky, it scared my cats into hiding. So stinky, I almost needed my inhaler. And now, so Stinky was back, and this time more persistent. Fortunately, I think Stinky was irritated that it couldn't access me, because this time the smell circled my home when I went to a different room. But I was on the second floor and had already closed all the curtains. I had blackout ones over the regular blinds, so I think I was just messing up a good time. Because that night Stinky, whatever it was, came and only stayed for an hour before leaving. Then the next morning I was set to leave for my internship. Stupid early, sun wasn't even up that morning. Heavy fog, and the place looked like Silent Hill. Sometimes we get the siren too. I was just waking up when I heard a shotgun go off in my yard. I hauled ass downstairs thinking someone had taken a deer in my yard, and I'm ready to fight, but when I get there, they're gone. I find a cartridge, or whatever it was, on the road in front of my house, and it looks like someone had took a shot at something in my lawn. My one neighbor didn't look at me for a long time, so I suspect it was him. He was always up early and had a penchant for shooting things. He very well could have shot a deer. It's Pennsylvania, after all. I didn't admit it because it scared me, and I never admitted it until now, probably because it's always scared me. But I don't think it was a raccoon, was it? Can you smell a stinky raccoon through closed windows and walls? You couldn't smell the skunks when they sprayed outside, and they did quite often. I am genuinely curious about this. The more I reflect, the more I think, I don't know what happened. I'm not trying to gaslight myself and leave it ambiguous, like it could have been a dogman or it could have been a super, super stinky raccoon. I don't know. I'm just glad that first night I barricaded myself upstairs and didn't go downstairs, where I would have been seen. Then I think I would be typing out a much different experience right now. Tonight's third and final encounter. I have two experiences, both happened in the same place, 10 Killer Lake in Oklahoma. This place has many different paranormal stories and legends associated with it, like people jumping into the lake and never resurfacing, ghosts seen walking on water, etc. So to start it off, this first is my mom's. My mom and I have a very open dialogue about everything, including relationships and, well, you know. This was probably about 15 years ago. My mom and stepdad had gone to 10 Killer for a few days to get a cheap cabin during off-season. There was a lot of snow on the ground, and they were probably the only people in the area other than the rangers and such. A little setup so you can picture it. The cabin is pretty small. When you first walk in, there's a living room / kitchenette. If you walk across the cabin to the right of the kitchenette, there's a short hallway with a tiny bathroom off to the right and a bedroom at the end. So my mom and stepdad were in the bedroom messing around. He had tied her wrists to the headboard and was doing their thing when they heard a large crash coming from the living room. They both leaned over and looked down the hallway and saw this massive wolf-like creature standing on its hind legs and looking just as surprised to see them as they were as it. It was so tall that it was kind of bent over to be able to stand inside the cabin. All of a sudden it growled and started to bound toward the hallway toward them, turning into the bathroom at the last second. My stepdad jumped up and chased after it. I don't really know what he thought he was going to do when he caught it. There was absolute silence for a few minutes, and my mom was pretty sure she was going to either be eaten or starved to death tied to the bed. Then my stepdad came back looking perplexed, untied her. He said there was nothing in the bathroom. There was a window in there, but it wasn't even big enough for a child to get through, let alone whatever this was. And even my stepdad couldn't pry it open when he tried. There were a few legends that say werewolves and such could travel through mirrors, so my mom guesses maybe that's what happened. The second experience, I was living in Florida at the time and had come to Oklahoma to visit. I was staying at my cousin's for the week. A day or so after I got to her house, a friend of hers had called asking if she wanted to come to 10 Killer with her and some of her friends. But since I was visiting, my cousin declined. A few days later, the same friend called again, this time in absolute hysterics. Apparently, she had gone to the lake with 3 of her guy friends. One day, they had all kind of gone about doing their own thing. 2 of the guys went to different docks to fish, while the other guy and my cousin's friend went out on the boat. They had decided to meet up later at the specific spot, but when they got there, one of the guys who had gone fishing didn't show. After a little while, they started getting worried and split up looking for him. No one could find him. When they met back up at the spot, the second guy didn't show, genuinely worried. The last guy took the girl back to the cabin, told her to stay there, went looking for the other 2. He never came back. The girl was freaked out and alerted the rangers to the situation, but they just kind of brushed it off, assuming the guys were probably off partying somewhere. The next morning, all 3 guys were found lined up side by side on the beach, dead. None of them had any visible injuries, and it was assumed they had drowned, but they were waiting for autopsies to be done. I asked my cousin about it a year later, and apparently after that call, she had never heard from her friend again. And I can't find anything about this incident online. Well, there you have it, folks, this middle of the night or early morning bonus. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps the channel growing and going, and what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free, simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Guys, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.